Uh-oh. Well, we're live, but Facebook doesn't agree with that. So let's see what Facebook says. Uh-oh. We were deleted off Facebook. I click go live, do it. We'll remove that and see what happens. Facebook's the only one that freaks out at the 10-minute mark. They want their thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what their deal is.
I would imagine there's probably globally so many things going live that
Oh, yeah. I mean,
they've got to have some parameters to just not bog the system down.
that's true. I feel like they should wait for me, but whatever. All right. This is just a live video of me staring at the screen and clicking a bunch of stuff, so that's fine. Okay, there. Maybe. Yep, check marks across the board. And yes.
I got a notification.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
To help tell you that you're live on your thing. Yeah, I get like 4 emails every time I set this up.
Yeah, this is typically my wife and I divide and conquer to put our 3 children to bed, and I'll usually have my son right about now when this goes off. It's a fine line. If he is already asleep, I can jump on and listen. If he's not, I'm trying to listen in and out, pop back in and out, and I have to go back and listen to those later, like when I clean the lizard room or something.
Yeah, I get it. We were just doing the same thing, finishing dinner, and then with me threatening my laptop. That's pretty much how that happened. So, better late than never. This is episode 36, and I made the little episode snippet talking about this is our second round, speaking about your collection. And of course, the first time was all about, your basilisks, all the setups, and just the really prevalent social media presence you have to show all of your successes there. And you are one of a few guests that I've had on where folks afterward came to tell me, oh, hey, did you know that so-and-so also works with X, Y, and Z, whatever species it is. And with the Sceloporus specifically, I had a lot of people asking me about that in relation to you, just because you have the basilisks and you have the helmeted, and those seem really similar, and arboreal, similar body structure and things like that. And then you look at the Sceloporus and it's like, where did that come from? But you have also made social media posts about species that are endemic to Mexico and endemic to Central America that had Sceloporus and basilisk on the cover of the book that you posted. So I assumed that it was because they were species that were from similar places, so it would match with setup easily. That's right. Is that what pushed you that direction?
Yeah, actually. So my primary focus for the last 10 years easy has been Corythophonidae, the family of basilisks, coneheads, helmeted basilisks. And I've got rather large enclosures that I keep groups of those animals in. And then probably middle of 2 years ago, I started keeping coneheads and helmeted basilisks together. Because if you've got a 6 foot tall, 3 foot by 2 foot enclosure, the upper portion of the enclosure is going to be the coneheads. They inhabit the tops of bushes and trees, where the helmeted basilisks like the vertical branches, the mid tree level. And I thought I could be able to keep these groups together instead of having to. I do everything at home, uh, and we're essentially maxed out for enclosures. Uh, I
Right.
can I can add more outdoor space, which I do every year. Uh, but wintertime, I can't add anything else. Um,
Okay.
so at that point, I was looking, well, how can I combine some of these things that could coexist, things that would potentially run into each other in their natural habitat, in their uh, the areas of the world that they come from, and it worked out great with those species. I had no problem with it at all. Then I started experimenting with striped basilisks, which is the smallest of all the basilisks, with cone heads and or helmeted basilisks. No problems with those either. Had a great run with that. Still do that. Um, Really, it's kind of crazy the idea that I got. There's a few years ago we were at I want to say it might have been Nashville Zoo, um, and they had a Bothrops exhibit that had dart frogs in it, and
Yes.
it was so badass. I mean, you've got this big, powerful snake and these tiny frogs all around him, and everything was perfectly smooth as could be. And I thought, okay, I want to do something more with the enclosures I've got. I want to lead towards more of a community setup, and so I wanted to find a small lizard that was fast because coneheads and helmeted basilisks are not very fast lizards. They're pretty steady in the way they move, somewhat predictable. So I thought like the next addition would be to add something that was more flighty, actually, and it might make things more interesting for those lizards as well. And so I started with just normal emerald swifts,
Hmm.
and I put a group of in my one enclosure. I think there's 1.5 in that enclosure. The second enclosure is 1.4, then 1.2, and then there's another 1.2 in one other enclosure. And it was kind of just to test it out, see how it would go, and it went great. They just took over, and you'll see some of the pictures I'll put. It'll have like a conehead lizard with two swifts stacked up on its back basking. And what was interesting is the swifts are very reactive to a person coming in the room, or if you open the
Okay.
door, whereas the other lizards are less reactive to these things. I think when the swifts give a heads up that something's going on and they dart really fast, it made the other lizards a little more jumpy. Like they took cues from the swifts,
Oh, okay.
and yeah, I think it added a layer of. Uh, I think we talked about it a little bit last time. How in all my closures I have lights that kick on at different times. We've got fans.
Yes.
Um, the one thing that I think that a lot of people fail to realize, we've gotten into such um, a habit of trying to make these sterile environments that we control everything. Everybody, you can't use this kind of a tree, or you've got to clean it from outside, or you can't have this type of plant. And we've made it almost too sterile and too stagnant. So if you imagine a typical pet lizard is going to be in an aquarium or an enclosure as a light over its head, that light is always in the exact same orientation. It kicks on at the exact same time. It turns off at the exact same time. There's never a cloudy day in the enclosure. Uh, it's so there's no wind, there's no predators. What an incredibly boring life it must be. And a lot of
Sure.
those,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of those animals, they settle in. They're so remarkably resilient that they can survive and even breed in those circumstances, and they can appear healthy. But what I think we miss out on is a lot of natural history, things that we wouldn't see, like a lot of the stuff that's written about helmeted basilisks online talks about how sedentary they are and how they don't move much and how they'll stay in the same spot for days on end, how they don't eat very much. And I think some photographer once caught a picture of a helmeted basilisk that had some moss on its head. And then that has then spearheaded articles that repeat, they stay so still that moss can grow on them. And
Right.
that's bogus. It's complete bogus. There's no way the animal could stay still long enough for moss to grow on it. It would have to eat. It's going to shed its skin. It still has to go find sunlight to bask. And when I gave those animals enough space, enough food, enough access to the various types of light, they're very active. They eat a lot. They move a lot. They mate a lot. Some people have success keeping males together. I can't do it. My males are so territorial that they'll spend the whole day just sparring with one another. And those are things that I think
Wow.
that an animal that's in a more stagnant environment is just not going to, they're not going to be happy. They're not going to act normal. They'll live, and they might even breed, some of those, but they're not going to be happy and do the things that they would do in nature. Part of being in nature is there's predators, there's other animals around that are moving around. And so my thought was, if we had some fast scurrying lizards in there, it might add a new dynamic. And so far it has. And then the side effect of that was the swifts are super interesting as well. And they're very pretty. And those,
Right.
that first big order of emerald swifts, I actually ordered so many of them. They were all wild caught, of course. And I
Right.
ordered so many of them because I expected to lose a lot more. And I think I lost like 2 at all.
Wow.
Yeah. And then like this year was the first year that they reproduced, and we had 40 babies from all the enclosures.
Oh
And
man.
this year I would collect the females out and put them in aquariums so they could deliver the babies there, because I'll never find the babies in those big enclosures. And I would assume at some
Sure.
point the other lizards would chow down on them. And I'm not opposed to that either. That's also fine. But if I can recoup some costs with these baby lizards, and I was lucky enough
Right.
on fauna, we were able to sell all of them. So
Oh wow.
yeah. So it would have been early last year. I started looking for what other types of swifts could I get. I was very interested in the emerald swift complex. There's quite a few emerald swifts that are cloud forest swifts that are live bearers. And Kalzu got a huge order in of what they were listing as Teniacnemus, which is it's a Guatemalan swift. They come from Guatemala and Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
But those orders all come out of Nicaragua. So I was kind of surprised that when I dug into that
Okay.
species, I thought, okay, well, it's possible that the range really does extend into further south than was ever known. Problem with Kalzu is I'm not a pet store, and they only sell to brick and mortar pet stores or people that have a solid inn. So I couldn't order
Right.
any of those directly from them. And trying to wait for those to filter through middlemen took too long, and it was very expensive. But right around that same time frame, there was a multitude of swifts that came in from all different, I'm certain, nefarious entries as well. But they quickly went everywhere. Boom. And then there was a ton of confusion about what was what, because if you get on like iNaturalist and you look up Teniognomus, it is a very specific looking type of lizard, and that's not what Kalzu had. But there was clearly some of those lizards being circulated.
Okay.
Well, so I was able to buy some of those lizards. I got a small group of those. And then later, I got another small group from another. They all came from the same place, I'm sure, but I had to collect them from different places. And those settled in really well. And they actually, I got one female came in and grabbed it. She gave birth, but she gave birth to 3 small lizards. 2 passed away. 1 lived and is already a subadult female. And then the following year, I had 2 females both deliver 3 lizards. So those are all in their own tanks growing up. And those are
Wow.
super, super pretty lizards. So on my social media, those are the males are turquoise green with a bright orange head. and it's a very, very unique lizard. The lizards that Kalamazoo had were actually a Nicaraguan swift, and they're also amazing.
Oh,
And they look very similar, but it's a little bit different. So it's there's so much confusion in that whole complex of emerald swifts about what's what. Um, but I did a fair amount of digging and pestering a lot of the guys that have made careers identifying and naming these species in Central America, and they were a lot more approachable than I expected. And so I bounced all the photos I had of them. That it's scale comparisons of the heads and the bodies, and I'm pretty certain kind of what all the species are now that are being imported. And I would imagine some of those won't be imported again because they were likely the product of some nefarious efforts.
sure.
Um, so I hope that the ones that came in, everybody can do well with those because they may never pop up again.
Right.
And I am hopeful that I can still get some of the ones that Kalamazoo got in. I didn't get any of those, and it's a whole different. It's a whole other species from Nicaragua. So I'm going to try hopefully this year to get a group of those if people have some success with those. Yeah, so I didn't start off to I kept swifts when I was a kid, and I kept swifts that are native to my area of the country, eastern swifts, eastern fence lizards.
Sure.
And I must have kept hundreds of them as a kid. And this was just another lizard I wanted to put in the mix just to see how the dynamic worked. So what I've recently added to the bottoms of all those enclosures are Coleonyx. I put in some Central American banded geckos.
Really?
So, yeah. And I'm going to see how those guys. So far, so good. We'll see how they do down there. Their range is identical to where these other lizards are found as well. So they cross over.
Sure. Yeah.
And the strange thing is most of the literature you find that people are keeping them in arid setups. But these things are found in tropical rainforests in Central America as well. So I was worried at first because of all the stuff I found online about if it was going to be too humid. But so far, I haven't had any problems with them. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
So you, in your social media posting, you obviously are very successful in breeding pretty much everything you keep. I always see egg pictures and all sorts of things. And given the setups that you have with the lizards, like in their regular activities, they're pretty stratified, and you really plan that out really well. And then as egg laying and those type of things start to occur, have you noticed any effects of if she's coming down to start laying eggs and it turns out there's other lizards down there? Like, have they found any kind of weirdness about
the
that?
enclosures are quite large. They're quite large. I mean, the footprint for most of those enclosures is, they're all a little bit different size, but the smallest one is 3 feet long, 2 feet deep. And then, of course, that goes up 6 feet. So inside of that, I've got there's different levels of planters with soil all the way down to the bottom. So some of the lizards prefer to lay their eggs in an elevated planter. Some like to dig under the bark. It's a little bit, they've all got plenty of space. It's all heavily planted. They could probably go down to the bottom and never run into another lizard. I never see the geckos. They're doing their own thing at night. They don't even cross paths.
Sure.
The swifts, they scurry about so quick that they're out of the way before anybody's ever going to have a problem. And they're not trying to lay eggs. They're all live bearers. So that just leaves, the other lizards are, no, I've not had any problems with that. Not yet. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
And now with setting up the various planters and things, have you gotten into the plant nerd side of the hobby, or you just pick a bunch of pothos and hang a bunch of plants? Or
I wish I had. When I was younger, I would do like I think we talked about. I had a group of red-eyed tree frogs when I was a teenager, and I had an immaculate setup for those guys with bromeliads, and it was amazing. Um, when I started back with just initially larger basilisks, those lizards are so hard on plants; they destroy everything. So
Sure, yeah.
I would set up a big terrarium with a lot of nice stuff in it, only to have it shredded in 2 weeks' time. So I
Right.
now almost exclusively use pothos. It's bulletproof. It's inexpensive. I've got to trim it back every 2 weeks, and then I just turn the trimmings into new plants. Um,
Yeah,
I
for
could put a
sure.
pot outside during when everything goes outside during the summer. I bring in plants with leaves this big. So that's almost all I'm using is exclusively pothos. I have an idea at some point when I'm making an upgrade that I want to do these same species setups in a slightly larger enclosure and add in amphibians. I would love to do some tree
Oh,
frogs.
okay.
I would want more space for that, and I don't have that space yet. But I think at that point I would have to be a little bit more generous with the plants that I offered in. Um,
Okay.
yeah, but right
I
now
can see that.
pothos, just pothos is all I do. It's just so bulletproof of a plant.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason it's so popular. Like it really is, the multifunctional plant for pretty much everybody.
It got really weird in the middle
So,
of the pandemic. I couldn't find it anywhere. Like they didn't have it at any of the plant stores, didn't have it at the hardware stores. It was a very odd thing. And then when it started to trickle back in, it was like 3 times more expensive than it should have been.
yeah,
And
yeah,
now that's
everybody
all.
wanted their pandemic house plants.
Yeah, yeah. So that's now bounced back to somewhat normal. So
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty much the same here. The whatever they want to call golden pothos that you always see at the hardware store, and
mhm.
then the it's called Wandering Jew.
Yeah,
It's purple leaves with a little stripe. Same thing, just a regular old common house plant. Everybody and their brother wanted one.
hmm
Jessica asks, "Do you have any fish in your water sources in the enclosures?"
I do. I do. I keep live bears in all of the tanks and ponds.
Very
All the
cool.
basilisks grub on fish. And then during the summer, I'll go field collect crayfish. It's a huge feeder that I use, and I'll stock all of the ponds with crayfish. And towards the end of each summer, I'll overstock them so that I've got crayfish on standby for several months into the winter. But just live
Awesome.
bears. I keep guppies in there. That's specifically what's in there.
Very cool. So you mentioned it on our last episode, and you've talked about it here that you're pretty in depth with your lighting, and there's a lot of variety. And
Mhm.
have you noticed as you have this stratification of use for the enclosure with the lizards, and now are you noticing the similar differences in their use of the lights? Are they, everybody reacts to their own space and
Mhm.
how they typically would live, and now is the lighting affecting that as well?
Um, I think their behaviors affected me. So what I noticed over time is
Oh,
um,
okay.
I would move and recreate the lighting strategies a little bit to facilitate some of those animals. What I mean, like a good example would be with the corytophanes, with the helmeted basilisks. They spend 80% of their time on a vertical perch on the middle of a tree branch, and they're a good 3 feet from the lights. So they're realistically, even with the best lighting, that's a little far away to get a lot of benefit from it. Now, what they'll do is
Sure.
every third day, they'll make their way up and bask in one of the spots uh, with no problem. So I was concerned that perhaps that wasn't enough, and they were only going up when they absolutely had to because they didn't want to be around all those other animals. So
Oh, okay.
I lowered some of the bulbs down into the enclosure and mounted them in the middle of one of the trees so that it shines down the side of a tree. That way they could choose to bask as close to it or as far mid tree trunk, not have to go all the way to the top. And
Okay.
what surprised me was that's a little unnatural. And I think they thought so too. And they didn't use it at all. They just would go around it and go back up to the top when they wanted to. So my
Wow.
theory is that's what they do in nature, though. They're lower canopy animals that when they want sunlight will go find a hole in the canopy to get some light. And that's what they
Sure.
do. When they need to go get the bulb, they go get it. And so I've still kept some of those in their spots because I want to see it play out for a much longer period of time. But for the most part, they're not using those spots at all. So when they go to the top, all the
That's
animals I'm
really
keeping
cool.
together, they have zero conflict. I mean, they're so chill and laid back. Um, the only conflict ever is when with basilisks, actual basilisks. Um, I have one enclosure of striped basilisk, the vittatus, and there are a trio of helmeted basilisks in there with them. The helmeted iguanas, they're also called. Um, and the male basilisk nipped the end of a tail off of one of the females in there. And I think it was just he mistook it for prey. That's really the only conflict I've ever had. I've never had any other problems with that. It wasn't. They weren't. It wasn't
That's impressive.
territorial. Yeah, they wasn't territorial or anything like that. But I think one of the things that we've done to avoid a lot of that conflict is we've got multiple basking locations. We've got multiple watering locations. Aside from the food that we just dump in, there's multiple dishes that we put certain types of the bugs that aren't going to cooperate go in a dish. The bugs that are going to crawl around can be cut loose. But they've all got so many. The resources are plentiful, and I think that keeps
Right.
them from having to have a fight. There's plenty of space. There's plenty of food. There's plenty of different lighting spots, and they can all develop their routines and not really come into any conflict with one another.
So that was something I did want to ask about the food sources. Uh, that kind of more of a discussion that's been happening to folks on the snake end of things is people have been offering either less food calorie intake wise or smaller food items
Mhm.
in the snake part of herpetoculture. Now, having a variety of lizards of different sizes in the enclosure, do you notice that species eat like quote unquote appropriately sized prey? Or do you see bigger lizards chasing down those little things? And are they more generalist, or are you seeing that separation kind of based on size, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, every I've got a lot of different species, so they're all completely different. I mean, the main basilisk species will eat anything that moves, and they prefer. They're not going to go after a fruit fly. It's too much work. But a small guppy all the way up to a large crayfish, they're going to go after it. Um, the thing that I try to do is rotate lots of different prey items. So we hornworms, silkworms, superworms, earthworms, crayfish, um, the swifts. One thing I discovered about these Teniognomus, they I dropped some fruit flies in there one day and they went nuts. These are adult swifts and they lost their minds. And the fashion they were plucking up these fruit flies reminded me of a horn lizard. It was it looked like you've seen a horn lizard picking off ants.
Yeah,
It looked
yeah.
just like that. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'm going to put ants in here and see what happens. So I went in the backyard and got some small black ants. Took me 30 minutes to get 20 of them. I dumped them in.
Right.
Yeah. And they went nuts for the ants. And so I tried it in the second group. They went nuts, like nuts. Like they're already avid eaters, but you could see there was a excitement in this attacking these ants. So I think they're ant eaters. These things they're eating other insects as well, but I think the ants are an important part of their diet. So
That's awesome.
it's awesome and terrible at the same time because now
Well, yeah. From a keeper's
knowing
perspective,
that
that's
I'm gonna have to give them ants because I'll feel like an asshole if I don't. So
right.
and that's a lot. That's a whole other thing. So this summer, me and the kids will be collecting a lot of ants to feed all these things. As soon as we jumped them with the babies, it was the same thing. The little babies went nuts. They absolutely went nuts. So that's interesting. That was something I didn't expect because they're not a tiny lizard. I mean they're
Yeah, I mean they're
yeah
a, you know
yeah it's
gecko or
pretty awesome.
bigger.
The traditional emerald swifts, they don't do the same thing. They won't go after the ants. I thought I'm gonna try it with these guys because then I was wondering, are these bright colors maybe boosted up by some acid or something that's in these ants? Is that
Oh,
contributing to it? And that could be. I don't know, but
okay. I get. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
but the
I
other
get
emerald
that.
swifts they didn't go after the ants, and they're also beautiful. So that doesn't. I don't see a correlation completely with that right now.
True.
So yeah, but it's yeah, like if you look at a helmeted basilisk, the corytophanes, they prefer very large prey items. So they've got a very wide mouth. It's like a frog. Looks like a frog's mouth, like a
Okay.
like a ceratophrys mouth. It's just a wide mouth, and
Yeah.
they'll take down the biggest thing you can give them, and they'll go after that over something small. They'll still, if they're hungry and there's something small, they'll take it. But if you put a small thing and a large thing in there, they're going to go for the big one every time. So if I put a big dubia
Wow.
roach in there, they'll go crazy for that thing. Um, and the cone heads, they don't want the biggest things they can get, somewhere in the middle. But yeah, I try to. I'm less concerned with the sizes necessarily, more with just variety. How many different things I can give them, and how many of these things that I can. One of the things about the silkworms, we're lucky we have mulberry trees in the yard, so I can feed the silkworm larvae fresh
Yep.
leaves, and then directly put this gut loaded bug in. It's got all of the nutrients that's coming straight from that leaf. And
Yep.
I feel like it works when the lizard bites into it and a bunch of green pops out the other end of it. It's like, that's it. I got a green smoothie into the lizard that way.
Yep.
So, and I'll do the same thing. The roaches, if they're eating sweet potatoes and the lizard bites into it and the orange goo busts out the other side, you're like, okay, that's what I want to see. And I think that, you know, they're, these lizards are not herbivorous, but they need plants. They just get them through the bugs in nature.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Literal gut loading. I mean,
Not
that's
sure if that answers your question exactly, but
yeah, absolutely. Jessica asks, do you raise your own feeders or purchase them or a mixture of the two?
a mixture, definitely a mixture. So I breed the dubia, and I have for the last year been breeding grasshoppers. And
Oh, cool.
yeah, that has been actually pretty interesting process. It took me a good 6 months to get the project kind of rolling. I made a lot of mistakes. I let the substrate dry too dry, so they weren't laying the eggs in the substrate. But once I dialed in like the right amount of moisture, if it's too wet, they won't use it. If it's too dry, they won't use it. Once I figured it out, they just started going. And then it takes a little bit of time to incubate the eggs, but I turned 60 grasshoppers into about 500 so far, and
Wow.
I'm very sporadically using them because the mistake I made with dubia was as soon as they started to breed, I would feed them off, and I was feeding faster than they were growing up and reproducing.
Sure.
And then I'd have to repopulate the whole colony again, and then I'd feed them off again. So I would love for this grasshopper project to replace crickets altogether. If I never had to look at another cricket, I couldn't be happier. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I get
they're
that.
quiet, they're clean, they don't get away. They do eat a lot of vegetables, and in summer now I'm good hands because I can feed them all the grass. I put the mulberry leaves in it; they eat all
Oh,
that up.
okay.
They're ravenous. Grasshoppers eat so much. In the winter, I'll try to feed them organic vegetables or leafy greens from the store. I try to get stuff that is 100% pesticide free because they're pests, and
Sure.
so it's not cheap to feed a bunch of grasshoppers. Um, it's not super expensive. My goal will be, um, if I can get this project off the ground, I would really love to go to the local reptile store, get a or a show, get a booth, and just sell feeder grasshoppers. Not even take lizards over there, just
Okay.
unload feeder grasshoppers. Just to pay for it, so it pays for itself. If I could find a way for the feeders to replicate and pay for themselves, that would be great. If not, super happy with where that project's going for my own needs there. The roaches are pretty simple. I used to do red runner roaches. The fellow that convinced me to start them assured me that they couldn't survive a winter here. Therefore, if they got out in your house, you didn't have to worry because they wouldn't live. And that's not true at
Yeah.
all. They're quite resilient and they can live in the cooler weather as well. So it took me forever to get
Right.
rid of the red runner roaches, but now those finally we're not finding those anymore. So I don't mess with those anymore. So I've still got. I mentioned the crayfish. We catch those ourselves. We'll take the family
Yeah.
to the creek. We all got a net, and we'll come home with hundreds of crayfish. Just
That's so cool.
put them all out in all the different enclosures, ponds, and tanks, and then I can just pull them up with a net, throw them in a bowl, feed them off as I need to, and then they can hunt them when they want to as well. Um, Praying mantis, I'll go and collect those through the summer. Uh, Starting
Oh, that'd
now,
be
actually,
neat.
yeah, right around now, we'll get lots of small ones, and then as we get it next couple months, they'll be a little bit larger, and then I stop shy of the adults. I don't mess with the adults. So, and
That's cool.
yeah, silkworms I have to buy. I've thought about maybe throwing my hat into that, but the I think it's a lot. I think that's a whole lot of work. I just don't know that I want to mess with that. I do have these trees. I keep looking at them like, man, how cool would it be if I came out one day and some silkworms just were in the tree and I could just
Yeah,
harvest them? So I haven't seen that yet. I've never,
that
like, this
would
is
be
the
pretty
first season
cool.
I've even thought to look at it. So, but yeah, that's it. That's what I do with my feeders. I
That's
tried
awesome.
breeding super worms and it worked. I bred them, but it's so much work and space and time that it didn't make sense for me to keep it up with the limited amount of space that I have now. That what I had to allocate to them wasn't worth it.
Right.
So it's not terribly difficult to do. It's just to do it in a meaningful way to have a rotation of food. You need a quite large project to keep
Right.
it out, especially the numbers. Like we go through about 2,000 superworms a month. We go through four
Oh,
thousand
wow.
crickets. We go through. I haven't started using the grasshoppers yet, but if it replaces the crickets, it'll be 4,000 grasshoppers a month. Um,
Wow.
yeah, fruit flies a lot. We go through a lot of fruit flies for all the hatchling lizards, and
Sure.
yeah, I was breeding those, but I gave up. It's another messy project. They're relatively inexpensive, and I can buy them in a pre-container and with the culture in the bottom, and they
Yep.
will they will replicate for several weeks. So I get my money's worth out of those. So I don't really want to. I don't have to breed
Yeah.
those again. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm in the same boat with that where I see dart frog people who are very successful at, having their culture and they have a system and it's set for, this time and at this many weeks I can get my culture and what have you. And I just buy it, man. I
yeah,
just,
yeah,
it's, once you have a collection that's so big, like I want to do more reptile stuff
yeah,
and less bug stuff. You kind of
yeah.
have to pick what you're going to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And then Justin asked, waxworms. I
Yeah,
actually have never. I mean, I have a lot that eats waxworms, but I have never had luck reducing them.
I've never tried to raise them. I'll probably once a month pull in some waxworms. I'll use them when I run out of silkworms. I'll get those. I've got a couple of species that are like
Okay,
the baby helmeted basilisks love caterpillars. They love them, and the silkworms are my go-to. Hornworms are nice.
sure.
Mix it up. If I'm out of all those things, I'll grab some waxworms to use. But they are a much lower quality feeder than those two other options.
Yeah, for sure. Especially knowing that you can gut load and do the things that you can do and having mulberry accessible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're in the same boat where we have mulberry accessible as well, and I mean you can't beat that as far as getting your feeders gut loaded.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made, you've actually mentioned it a few times already, but I made a point of letting folks know that we had talked last time. And then, of course, the thumbnail picture that you gave me.
Yeah.
Your family is pretty heavily involved in your hobby as well. Um, since we last talked, and then now you're adding other species and doing all sorts of things, how are the kids doing with that, with having smaller things? And the Swifts obviously aren't very handleable or that kind of
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
but
yeah.
how is that going?
So the great thing about almost everything we do is I, I'm not really like the get the lizard out, play with it kind of keeper. So the good if we are transferring animals and the animal is out and the girls are there helping and they want to hold one of the animals that's not flighty or bitey, absolutely. There's an opportunity for that. But on I mean it's a rare occasion that someone's holding a lizard at our house anyway, any lizard. So um
Okay.
that's not really an
I mean,
issue.
given the species that you've picked, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. Um what's been very interesting is just like you never know. You have kids and your kids are a lot more grown up than mine, but you don't know what path it's going to lead to. So my oldest daughter was like
Yes.
obsessed with it early on, and it would be easy to be obsessed with it because it's everything. It's all over our house. We're at the zoo every week. We were at the zoo before I came here to do this, and
Awesome.
yeah, but she's just become more obsessed with all of it. Absolutely, and like she's 5 years old with a above average understanding of herpetology. I'm quite proud of it. And one of the fun things that we've been able to do is, um, oddly, an unexpected benefit is the vast majority of the stuff that I put out on social media, are people I'm never going to interact with that see it, like it, comment. I'm never going to meet those people. But
Sure.
there's a handful of people that I've come to know. Some of those guys you've even had on here that are keepers that I follow, and the stuff that they're doing, I respect the hell out of. And additionally, people that start following randomly are keepers at different zoos around the country, and that opens doors to some communications, and it lets us set up trips. We take day trips and go to different zoos, and get behind the
Yeah.
scenes,
Cool.
tours, and take the kids. They get access to stuff that you know I would have killed for at their age, and but the crazy thing is they just take it kind of for granted that we're going to roll into a zoo and just you know knock on the door and let's
Yeah.
get away from all the people and go look at it in the back, Dad. So and sometimes I'm like, well, we don't know anybody at this zoo, so this is where we're going to look at them from this side today. But it's a really cool opportunity for me. I'm such a geek for it all anyway. But then to see my kids like really appreciate it, and then if we go to Nashville or Knoxville, or our next trip, I think is going to be St. Louis is on our list. Then we've got a couple
That
hours
zoo
drive
is
back
awesome.
home. Yeah, we've got a couple hours drive back home where we can talk about what it was. So we're going to go. I think next weekend we're looking at the Newport Aquarium in Newport, Kentucky. They have They just brought in some Orinoco crocodiles, and so
Cool.
we're going to go up and see that new exhibit. And yeah, it's I love it. I absolutely love it.
So with my thing, as my kids have grown up, is we don't breed very many things, hardly any, to be honest, because we do the shows and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, but that, especially when they were younger, like with the morning geckos, and we've had a few bearded dragon eggs and just random things like that, um, was always huge for my kids. And then you kids being younger, um, how, like, because you have egg layers, you have live bearers, is that one of those things where are they super interested in breeding it or seeing babies and eggs and things, or they just want to check out your giant cool
Yeah,
cage?
so like when you get basilisks established, they are so prolific. I mean, they're. I've got right now. There's a clutch that's started sweating today. I've got a clutch behind that that's
Nice.
another clutch coming in 2 weeks. There's a third clutch that should be another month and a half. In the cooler incubator, there's two more clutches of helmeted basilisks. So I'm the check them every day how they're doing kind of guy. Take a peek, pin light, see what they're doing. When everything starts to sweat and it starts to hatch, then I'm in there every other hour taking a peek at everything, and the kids can't wait to go and see what's going to come out of an egg today. We've got a whole routine. If one or two of the eggs don't hatch, I give them a day or two to catch up. If they don't hatch, we'll open them up to see what's in there. And normally it's just
Yeah.
a fully developed lizard, or on occasion we had one female that was producing like 4 clutches in a row that two of the eggs would never hatch. And when you open them up, they were these weird mutated Siamese twins. And but
Wow.
they weren't viable Siamese twins. It would be like you know half of a lizard body growing perpendicular out of a regular lizard. It was
Sure.
pretty interesting. Really interesting stuff. Um, but they can't wait to grab the tweezers and the scalpel and set up shop and open the eggs and see what's in there. So they've got a
That's cool.
very strong understanding of the cycle of life on both ends from
Sure.
this. Yeah.
And so at that age, how are they with the feeders? Because you have such a variety of bugs. Is that cool or gross, or how are we
My
reacting?
oldest daughter is all about it. She can't wait to go. If we're gonna go field collect bugs, she's on board. There's some things she doesn't like. She doesn't like crickets. She's not a big fan of the roaches. They're all about the super worms. They love to, when it's time to feed super worms, they'll go up and post up at the bin and collect them all out for me to get them ready. And
Nice.
yeah, they don't have any. They're in the backyard collecting roly polies, and we've got this time of year the mosquitoes start, and it's quite bad. And just
Right.
because, even if I didn't keep animals, I still wouldn't spray my yard with mosquito stuff. So what we did a few years back as an experiment was um, we figured we couldn't figure out where they were breeding. It wasn't on our property, but we thought if we could lure some of them to breed on our property, we could just stock 2 ponds in the backyard with mosquito fish. And so we stocked two
Oh,
ponds with
cool.
mosquito fish, and those ponds never had mosquitoes in them ever. Um, it didn't put a huge dent in the mosquito population. But then what happened is my daughter loves to catch these fish, put them in a test tube, look at them in the light, let them go, catch another one. She's just obsessed with, it reminds me of myself when I was that age and even a little bit older. Of just my grandmother lived in the country, and I would turn the porch light on at night and sit out there and catch as many tree frogs as I could, put them in a milk jug, and look at them through the top of the milk jug for an hour and let them all go again. So yeah, she's eat up with it. My other kids are interested in it, but at the same, my 3-year-old is not where my 5-year-old was when she was 3, if that makes sense. She's not going to be,
Sure.
I don't know, she's going to be exactly as enthusiastic with all of that. But she's still, they get a kick out of all of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are kind of separating a little bit. My middle daughter has gone really hard into the plants.
Mm-hmm.
She thinks that part of all of it is fascinating, and she actually, personally, she's actually really good at it. But she's more of a detail nerd. So
Mm-hmm.
she was already our invertebrate person and very, very detail oriented, and so which one needs water and how you're going to set all these things up, it, really appealed to her. And then my son is he makes no sense whatsoever. He's a huge turtle nerd, and that has been maintained this entire time. Uh, Very anti bug person. He's 12, and we were just making fun of him today because he stood back with me in the kitchen, and we're almost the same height. And my daughters were texting my wife a picture about how he's 12 and he's 6'1" and all this nonsense. He looks like a grown man, and but he won't pick up like darkling beetles for out of the super worm box. So everybody has their thing. Um, yeah, it just seeing how they all kind of parse their way through it. Like my oldest, they all love going to shows, but it was for different reasons.
Yeah.
And then my oldest, she was the big kid for the longest time, and so she was helping the little kids hold a ball python or do whatever. And then now she is about to turn 16, and little kids are so annoying, and I just want to hang out with our stuff, and just to see how their personalities are starting to affect what it is interests them. She's gone very girly in ball pythons and their colors and what she thinks is pretty and things like that. And so just to see it change over time has been really cool. But they definitely all started out just like you're talking of, I want to catch stuff and feed everything, and I want to do every single part of everything.
Yeah.
And then as time goes on, they're like, I don't really like cleaning stuff, or I'm not into feeding every Tuesday or whatever.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm glad that is continuing for you. And like I said, for especially on social media, you always have pictures and are
Yeah.
showing different zoo trips and stuff. So it's really cool to continue to see that happen. That's awesome.
It is. It is.
And so with now, you have gone into the colionics, and you were saying that you're interested in potentially expanding to the amphibian realm as you look at your upgrades and adjustments and things. So, in that light, how, because you really seem to, I mean, you've got it really parsed out of who lives where and what they're doing and how they interact. And you've been very successful in that realm, which is makes sense logically when I hear you describe what you're doing. It's
Mhm.
like, yeah, that what you describe makes sense that would work. But a lot of people will not try it because they feel it's a little risky or what have you. But then you can say like, oh yeah, obviously. But then to add amphibians to the mix, do you think? I mean, I think if you're caring for plants, you're probably not going to have a humidity issue as much anyway.
I definitely
But
it
do you
won't be
think that
humidity.
is are
I
you
won't have a humidity issue. I've got man, I that has been honestly the biggest key to all of this stuff was figuring out how to master the humidity and the cycles of the rainy season and the dry season. And right now is the beginning of the rainy season for everything I keep. So the
okay?
humidity is going way up, way up. So I humidify entire rooms instead of trying to do enclosure by enclosure. So
Oh,
all my enclosures are like screen or mesh. Um,
right.
People see that, and I always try to tell like, yeah, you can't keep that animal like this in your apartment. You're gonna need it.
Right.
It needs high humidity. I control the whole room, so I've got so many humidifiers going right now. I've got in my largest room, there are four-gallon humidifiers that run nonstop. They run nonstop.
Oh,
What happens, of course, the humidity spikes at night because when the heat lights go out, the humidity can manifest more. It's not getting dried
sure.
out as fast. So, which is what you want really. You want to spike your humidity at night. It should dry out a little bit during the day. I got fans everywhere. Every enclosure has fans. Additionally, I have big fans that are just rolling through the room, and they all have ceiling fans on top as well. So there's tons of airflow in there. If you walk in there in the morning, it's like a dense cloud of fog swirling around the room. And then
That's awesome.
that dissipates through the day, and then cycle starts all over again at night. And then I'll do manual spraying. I don't have a misting system. Someday I'll do that, but not when it's in the house. I'll wait till it's when we build
Okay.
a lizard building or something like that. I also am
Okay.
kind of a nerd that I like manual spraying because I like to see the animal drink the water, especially all the stuff I have is like hydration is like for neotropical lizards, not just neotropical lizards, most lizards. Like hydration is the one thing people miss out on the most. They
Yeah.
just don't. They put a
Yes.
bowl of water in there. They might even put an air stone in the water. They might have a waterfall. In my big enclosures with ponds, waterfalls, tiers of waterfalls. Those lizards still drink the mist water far more than they drink out of any of that running water. It's just how they drink. It's what they naturally drink.
Wow.
If they're drinking out of some water feature in the thing, it means I messed up somewhere along the way. They're not getting the water the way they prefer to get it at that point. And then I've got to say, okay, what did I miss in this? How did I not give that animal an opportunity? Like the helmeted basilisks and the coneheads, sometimes you have to spray those animals for 2 or 3 minutes nonstop before they'll even start to lap up the water. And then they may lap the water for 2 or 3 minutes. So you've got to have a irrigation plan
Wow.
for a steady stream of water on each animal you're going to spray. We've got 100 plus animals. And so once I dialed all those things in, that's when I really started to see like everything acting like normal lizards. The breedings go, all the courtship stuff's kicking off right now. Last year, the first year with the helmeted basilisks was 2 years ago. And they made it, and the females looked gravid. Nothing ever happened. They never laid the eggs. I'm assuming they just reabsorbed them. I think it was just too soon in establishing the groups, but it was in different setups, different groups. I had no success. Then last year, the first season, they mated. Everything looked like it was going to happen. Never got any eggs. It was the weirdest thing. And then late in the year, they started mating again randomly. Boom, eggs everywhere. And that species takes like 6 months to incubate the eggs. So some of those eggs just hatched. Some of them are yet to hatch. But now this year, I've already got 4 gravid females. They've been mating already for the last month. And so I think we're likely to see 3 clutches out of those a year, which doesn't really surprise me because like the plumifrons and the basiliscus, they're producing a clutch every 2 months year round.
Wow.
Yeah. So it seems like
That's crazy.
those other lizards should do more than a clutch a year as well. So
Sure.
there's a lot of really like the literature on all of this stuff is so poor. There's not there. It's mostly recycled. I mean, most of the guys, a new book will come out. It might have some new photographs, but if you really read between the lines, it's the same paragraphs that I've read for 25 years about these species. And
Sure.
there's a lot more. There's a lot more that's like going on that people haven't put all of it together yet. So they're
That's really cool.
very common lizards, and they're very cheap lizards. Most of them, not all of them, and but they're. It's very interesting. When I first started, I thought it's not how I make a living.
Sure.
So it was never a necessity to sell the animals. But then the breeding projects I started with the basilisks, the only way to really do a breeding project if you're serious, is you need a lot of animals. So somebody gets like 2 animals or 3 animals, and they're going to do a breeding project. It's not going to be a real project. You're not going to, they might breed, but it's not a breeding project.
Right.
If you're going to do a breeding project, you really need a quite large group to do something like that. So that's what I did. I would establish these groups as large as I could accommodate. And once I got a certain number of them, I was like, well, I'm going to produce a lot of these. So if I can sell these things off, let's see here, this price point, this many animals. Oh my goodness, that would be really nice. The problem is there's just not that much of a demand, and I'm way better at natural history than I am selling the babies. So through the pandemic, I started looking like we got stepped on. I have a gym, a kickboxing gym, and the state government just stepped on our throat hard. It really set us back like heavy. It was really, we still haven't recovered from that. And during that period of time is when I was like, okay, what could be another side hustle? This is the other thing that I'm good at. Is there a way to make this into a business? And that was kind of the rapid expanse into the other species that I always wanted to work with, the coneheads,
Sure.
the helmeted basilisks. One of the problems with basilisks it's sort of like they can get as big as a monitor, but you need a monitor size enclosure to keep them.
Right.
They're so active. They need a ton of space. They're not cuddly. They're not going to it's not a bearded dragon and you can scratch his chin.
Right.
So there's only, I can make a lot of them, but it takes me a long time to sell a lot of them.
Right.
But those other species, they're what I like to call apartment basilisks. They need much less space.
Okay.
Yeah, they're super chill. They're not, they can't run 60 miles an hour away from you. And they're still they're challenging enough that it's not for the beginner keeper. But I think that there's a market for something like that. And then the Swifts, I think there's a really big market for the Swifts just because they're absolutely stunning. These
they're beautiful.
They're stunning. They blow me away. Everything. I walk in the room, I'm like, these things are crazy, crazy beautiful. So, but the keeper in me, like I hatch the eggs and I'm like, okay, hey, would you, I'll get an email. I see these things in your social media. Can I buy these? And I'm like, no, I'm going to put them back into the group. I have this idea that I want this size of a group with this ratio, and I want this size over here with this ratio. And so I'm just going to reinvesting into the groups first.
Sure.
And then I'll have the size of stuff that I want for a breeding project. And kind of the realization I came to was with the species that I'm keeping, that I probably could make a decent little bit of money every year off of these things. At the very least, it should pay for itself plus some.
Right.
But I think the win-win for me is going to be establishing this groups in the sizes that I want and just holding on to stuff for a while, because obviously I've got to get rid of some of it. I can't keep everything, but I don't want to go big because I think that over the next 3, 5, 10 years, there's not going to be hardly anything left in the hobby. I think everything's taking a really fast turn. There's going to be a lot of bread and butter stuff. And then a lot of the stuff that I have that's pretty common now might not be so common then.
Sure.
And it's just the stuff that I like to keep anyway. So maybe I'm going to be wrong and I'm just going to have a bunch of lizards that I can't sell. But I think the smaller stuff I have is going to go well. The coneheads are going to sell really well. The helmeted basilisks is going to sell really well. I don't have any problem moving the plumifrons. What I thought was going to be a lot more easy to unload, and once shipping prices get back down, it might be sending them to Europe is still a good option. But the common basilisks, the Basilisks, they are essentially non-existent in the hobby anymore. They They weren't
Yeah.
available forever. It's the largest of all the basilisks. Very impressive animals. I was fortunate to get a big group from Nicaragua, and then later there was a the last legally exported group from Costa Rica was residing in Germany. Those animals were aging out, and a gentleman in the U.S. bought all of them, and he had a little bit of success breeding them. And I ended up with 2.2 of those captive bred, and they are significantly different looking than the Nicaraguan line, and they're just beautiful, beautiful animals. And maybe there'll be a market back, I think, in Europe for that. That's a lot more. It's appreciated a little bit more over there. But the price point for those
I
animals
can
in
see
the
that.
States, the price point for those animals in the States has proved a little bit tricky because when you look at a striped basilisk that's now invasive in Florida, you can buy it for $5 wholesale. And these go for way, way more than $5. So, and it's just difficult to parse
Yeah,
that out.
you need people. Yeah, that see that sucks because there are people that appreciate the animal, and then for something like you're talking about is, and I don't even know how you price that because I'm not good at that, but like the story of that matters. Like it's if you are into her pediculture and you're actually a hobbyist, you're not a pet keeper, you're a person who is into this, like that. Yeah, I don't really know how to quantify that portion of it, but to me that's actually the more important
Mm-hmm.
um, aspect of that, I suppose. Like, to be the person, assuming, if you're a guy who or is going to buy basilisks or a similar type of lizard in any case, that interests you and you want to have that type of setup, then being a person who is now involved in the continuation of that story, like that's huge. That's And especially in herpeticulture, the way that things come into this hobby, sometimes through nefarious means, sometimes there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot of backstory for certain select species to where
Sure, most of them,
like
most of them
yeah,
are.
but like look at abronia. Abronia are cool. They're little. They live in cloud forests. It's really just an alligator lizard. Like that, the actual keeping of those, it's kind of cool. It's like a big scaly dart frog. Whatever. But it's the backstory. It's being involved in Abronia Alliance or those type of things. It's and now for somebody like you, when you start to talk about basilisks and all the different kinds, and you have a stratified setup, and you were able to get these particular animals, and a whole lot of story there, and it's not just yeah, I bought one on king snake and got basilisks or whatever because they were cheap, and they're cool, so I keep them. Like no, man, that's how we kept it in the 90s, old like back in the day, and we sucked at it, and it wasn't the right thing to do, and then it all faded away,
Mm-hmm.
and which now doubly makes it important to do it the way that you're doing it and to be involved in the story that of those animals and now your story and so on and so forth. Like it, especially a big old huge basilisk is an iconic species just from the image of seeing it in Reptiles magazine or whatever. But now in the story of herpeticulture, it's starting to take on even more of that role. And yeah, it. But then how do what's the price tag of that on Morph Market? I have no idea.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like
it's
it
tricky.
should be, when you look at it and you're like, oh, that's kind of expensive. It should be like that's why there's so
Yeah.
much more to it than it's a super cool green lizard with this sweet head structure. Like yeah, and then this whole giant book of stuff behind it. It.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah. Speaking of Reptile Magazine, I've actually I've got an article in the next issue about basilisks. So
Really?
yeah, yeah, it'll come out.
Awesome.
Not the not the issue that's out now, but the very next one it'll be in.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
cool.
So that's kind of like my idea with the social media was. I think we talked about it last time. In '09 is when I kind of got back into keeping animals again, and it started all because basilisks were actually one of the species I never invested a lot of time in when I was younger that I always wanted to, and I kind of I ran into one in a actually we were promoting fights here in Louisville, and I had a meeting with the venue, the gentleman that owned the venue, and it was right next door to a pet store, like a chain pet store here. And I got there early, so I was killing time. I went in this pet store, and there was a horrible looking plumifrons in there, a green basilisk, and I didn't think much of it. I thought, that sucks to see that, and went had my meeting, drove home, and then there's this little nagging. I had no animals at home, no animals. In fact, my wife didn't even know me with animals. You know, she knew, but I don't think she knew, and so I told her, I said, listen, if this event does well, I'm going to buy that animal. And, I hate that it's over there. It's not beyond saving. And she's like, whatever, man, whatever. And at that time I had these two upstairs rooms that were open with nothing in them, but just storage stuff. So the event went well. I bought the lizard, set him up. By the end of that year, I had 6 of them, and we were putting together a monster enclosure for them. Over the next few years, when they started cranking out babies, I was like, I couldn't give them away. I was giving them away. I was donating them to, I would contact zoos. Anybody wanted them could have them. I would even pay for the shipping, just to, put them out there. And when that project started to slow down, I was like, man, I don't know, you can't compete with the import market. They can import those animals for so cheap that the amount of money that you're going to set up these enclosures with lights, with food. So the thing I never considered, it never even crossed my mind that there was a Facebook group for lizards, and then one day when I'm goofing around on Facebook, I stumbled across one. Never thought to use Facebook like for a tool like that. I'm talking like 2018. And that's when I realized, like, oh shit, there's a whole, this is a thing in social media. I never even thought about that.
Right.
So this latest, run, I told my wife, I said, look, if we're gonna ramp up a little bit in hopes that, we're gonna produce enough of these things that we can recoup some of our investment, I'm gonna maybe try to start the foundation of building a market for it. If there's not a market, let me build it. Let me put social media out there every day and build a following. And it's starting to work. I mean, I think that I'm really happy with Instagram. I prefer Instagram over Facebook. Facebook's kind of a necessity.
Sure.
But it's with Instagram. I don't really the interaction are people message me in private. In Facebook, you put up something, and it's like, do I want to open this can of worms with a reply to this every little thing that comes up? So, but it's really actually there's a few groups that I post stuff in that there's a lot of really high level keepers in those groups, and so there's not a lot of BS or anything in those groups, so I don't mind them so much. But I think that if I can keep plugging along, then it lets everybody. I want to be the guy for these families of lizards that everybody says that's the guy that has them. That's where you want to go, and that way it's not a huge market of people that want them. But if everybody that does want them comes to me, then I might have something for them.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I'm pretty sure you are that guy. I mean, at least in basically everybody that I know. Yeah, I think, I don't know, not that I hope, I guess, that seeing the work that you're doing, knowing that they're very prolific and that it is possible to have sustained success like you are. I don't know. You're right in that you really can't compete price point wise with the import market. What I, and I don't know how it's going to play out, but what I hope to see is, I don't know, kind of twofold. I hope that we don't get hammered by legislation
Yeah.
that eliminates the import market. However, the the realist in me, I think we're going to get hammered at least a little bit,
Mhm.
and it's probably going to hurt that market.
Yeah.
And I think one of the ways that we as a hobby, people talk about USARK and there's, there's a million of us and all this other stuff, and they're talking about pet keepers, and they're very, that's true. There's bunches and bunches of them. And I think that one of the ways that we can show people who want to legislate these things that we're not fly by night flea market Savannah monitor slingers anymore is self-policing. Like, stop being a jerk off when you know you can, I know a dude that produces a ton of basilisks.
Mhm.
I know that basilisks are highly prolific. I You don't need to buy $5 imports.
Right.
Like, they're, and it's not even, I guess it is a little bit of a sales pitch, because I like your stuff, but the it's also, as a in herpeticulture, in my opinion, I guess, like, that's the right thing to do. Of, there are certain species that you don't need to buy an import veiled chameleon. You
Yeah.
can't buy an import bearded dragon, but if you could buy an import bearded dragon, you don't need to.
Right.
You don't need to buy an import uh, panther chameleon. Like, all these iconic species. Well, why is that? Well, it's because they're beautiful. People put a ton of work into them, and it turns out they're highly prolific. They breed like bugs. Well, you're starting to show a very similar pattern with neotropical lizards in the grouping of basilisks.
Mhm.
They're super prolific, takes a lot of space, takes a whole lot of food, but you're getting the eggs. And so it's, you have a blueprint. There's a plan. This works. You don't need to buy a bin of them from Nicaragua anymore, you know.
Right.
And realistically, if we're getting a bin of them from Nicaragua, it should be like four of you, or the other three of you that theoretically I hope exist in the United States, and you guys just split that bin, and then the rest of us will just buy babies from you 2 years from now. Like, that is a real way that we could show people who want to legislate this stuff that we're doing it in a serious way. We're taking it seriously. We're not doing throwaway pets anymore. And I think you're right when you say it in the way of, if there isn't a market, you're hoping to create one using social media. That's a really smart way to do it, and it essentially is what you are doing, because the current market is bluntly throwaway pets, and
Mhm.
you obviously showing with your collection and showing your enclosures and your amount of effort on social media, it isn't throwaway. It's amazing and prolific.
Mhm.
So that, I don't know. I hope that people see that and they think, because when I see what you do, I think chameleons.
Mhm.
It makes me think of people who breed chameleons, and that has built itself into a very robust marketplace
It has. It has.
where,
Probably better than any other lizard species.
but
Like,
yes, agreed. And
yeah.
they are tracking as a marketplace for that group of lizards, to where it's just a higher level of education, I suppose, for entry level chameleon keepers, to where most entry level chameleon keepers, because of social media, are educated to the point that they're like, hey, probably shouldn't buy an import. It's going to have a lot of problems. I'm really going to struggle. You really should pony up the money for a captive bred panther or a captive bred jewel chameleon or whatever the case may be. There's a million panther chameleon breeders. Guys like Frank Payne have weird chameleons, different stuff, right?
Yep. Yep.
It feels like that is what is happening with you. It's
Certainly.
just that
And
you're
I
at
think,
the very
yeah, with the
start of it,
chameleon, with the
which
chameleon
sucks.
market,
But
with the chameleon market, and I'm on a very, very tiny scale. I see it with my own what sales I have to date. I'll see the same thing with most of the chameleon market. The captive bred market are people's second chameleon, um, because
fair,
they learned a lesson because they discovered a chameleon and bought it on a whim at a Petco. And the Petco sold them the wrong enclosure and the wrong lights and a lizard hammock and all kinds of goofy shit that they didn't need. They went home. The lizard did good for 3 months, started to crash. They found a Facebook group. Everybody in the Facebook group told them, "What, this setup's trash. Get rid of all this, fix this, take it to the vet." The lizard died. Now they have all this stuff that they upgraded and fixed, and then now they're in a group, right? So unfortunately, it takes that to draw the people into the knowledgeable groups. Then they
true,
buy their next go around is, I'm not going to fuck with Petco. I'm going to get Frank Payne to sell me a carpet chameleon, something of that nature.
true.
They'll make a better educated guess. I see the same thing. I'll have people reach out that bought especially like any basilisk that's sub-adult or adult. They bring it home, they put it in a 55-gallon aquarium. It busts its face up all day long, gets an infection, stresses out, stops eating. They're asking for help, and I always do my best to get back to everybody and, offer some suggestions. And I can. Most of those animals die, and then a few months
Yes,
later, that person's like, hey, I think I want to do this again. What would you recommend? Now they're under the fold. Just unfortunate that it has to, but that's how most people come across it, like at a pet store,
sure,
or even at a reptile show. You go to a reptile show and, there's still at every reptile show, the vast majority of stuff is people flipping wild caught animals. So,
right.
it's relatively inexpensive. You can grab it up. You can, you get that immediate sense of gratification. And that's just part of it. I mean, it's just absolutely part of it. So, the chameleon market did a really good job of getting, first learning how to keep chameleons, right? And then creating good groups and structure. I mean, there's no groups for the lizards that I'm working with online right now that are as organized as a lot of the chameleon
Right.
groups.
Right.
And so, and that goes for almost everything. It's really remarkable to see what the chameleon groups have done in a relatively short amount of time. I mean, if you go back to 1989, like nobody knew how to keep chameleons at all. Everything was just,
Yes.
it was such luck. I mean, you could find pet stores with Senegal chameleons in completely enclosed glass boxes with so much humidity, you couldn't even see the lizard in there. And then you find out
Yeah.
like, oh, wait a minute. This is a arid grasslands chameleon and you guys are drowning it with humidity. And that's what everybody thought. Like that was why it was living. They die because you can't keep the humidity up enough. And
Yep.
think how many of those things got wiped out. And now everybody has a really good idea how to keep almost all chameleons, and they actually do really well in captivity. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. Whenever I go through your social media and I see your posts and hear you or read, I guess not hear, but just how you describe the experiences you're having with that group of lizards, it that's where my mind goes every time. And
Yeah.
I think that's what I really do think that the raising the level of education of your quote unquote beginner herpeticulture person can, I just want them to go to you and Frank Payne and like one or two other guys first every time.
Yeah.
Which is a pipe dream, and I know that. But the if we can raise their level of education using social media, because that's where they're all coming from anyway,
For sure. For sure.
and prevent them from making the first lizard mistake, it's kind of twofold. They get a better experience because they're not going to lose that first wild caught animal or what have you. It helps you guys, which I hope keeps people like you at your level of effort. I want guys like you to be successful because you have shown that you'll put in this level of effort, and you should be rewarded for that in general. Like, that's just karma. But from the perspective of herpeticulture, like herpeticulture as a whole needs to realize that, hey, remember how you never cared about basilisks until you saw a picture of them and they were really cool? And then you thought to yourself, I wonder where all those went. They're gone, except at Eric's house. Like, I want people to put that together in their brain.
Well, and that could happen so easy. I mean, today's dime a dozen lizard is tomorrow's rarest thing on the market. I mean, things
Right.
change so fast. It happens so fast. So I think the challenge for me will be, as we this year and next year we'll start producing everything. Everything I've got will produce a lot.
That's cool.
So then I've got to and you mentioned Frank Payne. He's a really I eat up everything he puts out because he is kind of like, he's got all the aspects of he's producing it, but he also he's mastering how he's going to disseminate the information and sell it.
True.
That's the part that I've got to if someone emails me and they want to buy a lizard and they say something just a little bit wonky in the email, I'm like, I don't have any right now. And that's a terrible business plan, but I'm like, oh, I can't sell this person this animal that's saying what they're saying, So I usually will try to field that out a little.
But no, that's ethical. That's your ethics.
Yeah.
And the crappy thing about the way we do a lot of stuff nowadays, not even in reptiles, just in general, is that's weird. Or people would be like, what? Like that makes you not a good salesman or whatever. And I don't know, man, you're just valuing the wrong things to where, oh, like, I don't like throwaway pets. I keep a species that was readily imported, and you put in so much effort and so much work. Like, dude, read a book and then come talk to me. Like, this is not that. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's awesome. Like, that should be the accepted way, not that's weird. What do you mean it's weird? What? Like, no, this is, it's, raise your level up, man. Bring your A game if you want to get legit stuff. Like, be legit. That, I don't know.
So
I value that immensely. I think that's amazing.
I have a secret fantasy plan that will be, I've got a lot of data to accumulate and then replicate, but I kind of want to write a book on this family of lizards, on all the basilisks, and kind of update literally everything that's been out there, from every reptiles magazine article to every book that you can buy right now is recycled information. And there really probably since Bert, there hasn't been anybody that was doing comprehensive breeding with basilisks in captivity. And
until you, yeah.
And so I want to update.
Nothing,
I want
you.
I want to update the literature on that. I've never written a book, so that'll be, but what I have been doing since 2009 is keeping immaculate notes and photographs and Um, you know, I've got actually I mentioned this to somebody else in passing, and then do you know who Russ Gurley is? The author that does a lot of
Yep.
different herb books. He reached out and says, "When you're ready, tell me. We'll do it." And I was like, "Okay." He said, I'll give you." He sent me already like this is the layout of a typical book of what you need to have, and
Yep.
yeah, so it's an interesting idea, but I'm not going to do it until I'm not regurgitating any of the information, right? So I have, a lot of people. One of the things that, for my personal, like, what satisfies me as a keeper is if I get an animal and they breed inside of a year, I don't. That means they're doing well, but I can't really take credit for that. If I've had them less than a year, even if they bred in my house, they haven't had time to have any ill effects of poor keeping yet. They haven't had time to, there's a lot of things
I get that.
the mistakes I could make haven't kicked in yet. So let's say that happens. Great. Check mark. Not doing anything wrong, but that doesn't mean I'm doing it right. Do they breed again the next year? And do they breed again the next year? And then can you bring some of those offspring up to add back into the groups? And that for me is the challenge that I want to have with every species I work with before I go to write a book. Because there's a lot of people that are happy to grab a species up. It breeds the first year. I did it. I win. Yeah. And then they're on right away that they're gone. I'm on a new project now. It's like, you just did it once and, inside of a year, there's so much to find out, like maybe your lighting strategy was wrong and that wouldn't have kicked in for 7 or 8 months. And then they would start to go downhill, or, there's some things they're going to do even better if you were doing it right second and third year. So after I can accumulate enough success and notes, and I've had some really, really remarkable things pop out with basilisks that I've got to replicate before a lot of people, I could say, I did this and this is what I did and it worked, but I need to be able to do it again for me to say that's what I did that made the difference. But I've got a couple males that the biggest problem has always been the development of their sales in captivity. And I've got males that are really, really awesome and that were born in captivity. So once I can replicate some of those projects again, I think I want to try to get with Russ and put a book together. And yeah, that way, at least, even if it's not a huge financial thing, it's a little stamp on giving something back.
So, by the time this episode comes out, I will have already done it, so it won't really matter. In our live chat, I don't see any of them in here yet, but literally as soon as I click off this episode, I'm going to make a handful of messenger groups because I have at least 3 people I can think of off the top of my head who will probably listen to this episode and may or may not be in the chat floating around somewhere that either have or are currently writing reptile species specific books. And I'm going to make group chats for them with you
Yeah,
because
would love
Russ
that.
is an amazing asset. And I know people that are working currently in that realm. And they all share your mentality of wanting to compile and put together what they feel is the appropriate information. Um, that could be amazing. So
Hey,
that I for sure will do.
okay.
The second part of that is, and I wonder. I mean, you probably do because you coach, but um, do you realize that when you are talking about um, all of this as your project, that you sound like a person who's into martial arts?
No, it didn't occur to
So,
me.
what I mean by that is, um, it's a joke in jujitsu, right? Of there's like 100 white belts every year that show up, and then 5 years in, there's a bunch of blue belts, and they all quit because they finally got their blue belt, and then 10 years in, there's some purples and browns floating around, And then at like year 15 to 20, there's like 3 dudes that are finally black belts, and they're all just hanging out at the gym. Like, boy, remember that one guy? It just takes forever, right? And
Right.
it's such a long process. And basically all martial arts are like that, that
Sure.
they're all just continuous physical learning. That's literally how you talk about all of this. And
Yeah.
I just knowing your background, I just think it's cool, like knowing your background, that it's that honestly is a philosophical approach to think, especially with martial arts. It's a philosophical approach to learning a physical skill set. And then when I hear you talk, it's continuous, and I keep all these notes, and I've continued these things in multiple generations of animals, and it just sounds like continuous learning, and it's very fitting, knowing your background. I think that's awesome. So, and I do notice that a lot of people who are successful in the way that you are successful, even if they don't necessarily have your background, when you hear them talk about other hobbies, or maybe they do a sport, or as an adult they continue to do some sort of sport just for the fun of it, they talk the same way that you talk. They're
Sure.
speaking about things in long
Process.
term.
Yeah.
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 um, I think that's amazing, and a lot of my friends who do this the way that I quote unquote think is the right way to do it are like that, and we speak the same way of continual processes. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. Good.
So we are cruising past the hour and a half point, and I think that is an awesome way to end the episode, because I love what you're doing, and I love that you recognize that there is a need for something like a book, and I hope that that happens. But I also think it's awesome that you put the caveat on it of wanting to have the information in the way that you want it before you present it in a package to everyone else.
For sure. For
And
sure.
I think that is it's kind of a culmination of what I think it is that you're doing, with the success that you're having. I find that very interesting, and I think that's a really great way to do it. And it's most likely the reason you are having the success that you are is your philosophy of doing this. Um, so, having said that, even though this is your second time around, where can folks find you? I know you said you prefer Instagram over Facebook.
Instagram's the best way to point. Yeah, like at cask headed is the it's where I post multiple things a day. Um, I'm
Yep,
very
for
active on
sure.
there. I put stuff on Facebook constantly as well. Anything I'm sharing on Instagram will go up on Facebook as well. I don't
Okay.
use my regular Facebook account. I use that for fight sports for the most part, but I'm in groups for all the animal stuff. But
Okay.
Instagram, anybody can find and follow everything I'm doing on Instagram. And
Awesome.
what episode is this? You said
This is 36.
36. So I've
Yep.
heard almost every one of these so far, and
Cool.
it's been fun to watch this thing kind of grow. And um, you've had some amazing guests on here so far. And is
Yeah.
this where you
It's
thought it would be by now?
um yes and no, I suppose. I am a little bit weird about asking people to come on that I don't know. Obviously, with you, you were an early person that I didn't personally know to ask you to come on. Um, but with you and Frank and some of these folks that are having the successes that you're having, um, whether you guys realize it or not, you really do have a huge reach in herpeticulture, and so a lot of people message me or send me names, and hey, have you talked to so and so? Did you see the post they made? Did you see? There really is a whole lot of interest in it, and the same names consistently come up over and over again. And I was really lucky to recognize that, I guess, early of like before people told me I had seen your stuff and I thought it was cool. You know, I had seen Frank's stuff and I thought it was cool. So I knew that I wanted to talk to guys like you, and then to have people also come after the fact of, oh, hey, you know, did you see this? And it's like, yes, I have that planned. You know, I have a list. I'll get there. I promise. You know, just wait. I got episodes coming or whatever. Um, a lot of the things people were asking for were the things that I also was already asking those folks.
Mhm.
And then doing the network thing and having a sponsor and different stuff, I totally didn't expect that. But then with those folks, it's just kind of like a big buddy text group. Um, everybody's super personable. You know, the folks from Black Box, I met them at a show, and it's not like a corporate sponsor or whatever. Like I literally met them, and then we went out to Chili's and ate dinner. Like they're cool. They're just regular people, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and all of my interviews have been that way. Like you're cool to talk to. You're just a lizard nerd like me, and you know, people get very on, you know, social media, and it gets a little weird. Like, oh my god, that guy's cascaded on Instagram. Like, do you know what kind of lizards that dude has? And it's crazy. But then to talk to you, you know, it's just a regular conversation, and we talk to the folks in the live chat. Like it's very easy and
Yep.
personable.
Yep.
There aren't a whole lot of like personalities, I guess, like, you know, like YouTube stars or whatever. Like I haven't really run into that stuff. Um, might also be like I'm not looking for those people. Like, you know, the
Right.
people that message me to say, hey, check out Eric's stuff usually also say, oh yeah, it's really cool. I messaged him. Or it's a personality thing. You know, it's the person that they want to talk to. So yeah, it's been really awesome, and it has continued. It always is folks that those are the messages I get. It's never, oh, they own Parenti or they own the coolest lizard. Like it's, hey, this guy is cool and also very knowledgeable. You know, I think it'd be a really cool conversation.
Mhm.
And that's how people describe the folks that I have on as guests, yourself included. Um, and I don't know. I just think that's more important, I guess.
Yeah, it's well, my point to all that was it's yeah, keep going with this because these things are like it's funny because there's other podcasts that I've listened to in the past that I can't even make it through all of them. But like I mentioned earlier, I don't know if we were live, but I mentioned this is well past bedtime for my son now. But I'll have my son, and he may by 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time be asleep, or he may not. And every time the notification comes on, I don't know if you can see who chimes in, but
Yep.
I'm almost always click
Yep.
on. And if he's not asleep, I try. I might have to come back to it later. But yeah, I've learned so much from the other guests you've had on here. But there's like,
Oh, me too.
yeah, it's a good resource, and I think that like most things, the longer you keep doing it, it's just going to gain more and more momentum and steam.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's
Yeah,
it.
especially with
Thank you. Thank
podcasts
you.
being so new. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. All right. Well, we will wrap this one up then.
Have a good
Let's
night, Bill.
do. Yeah, you too. Thanks for coming on, man. Uh-oh. Let's see what the laptop does. Okay. So we had a late start due to my laptop doing its own thing, but that was episode 36. And Jessica kicked on in the live chat, as she always does. Thanks for hanging out, Jessica, to say that means that it's been over a year already. And it has. And hopefully Eric will see this. But Jessica's other comment was if you did a Kickstarter or something like that, I would absolutely contribute and bug everyone I know to do so as well. Yeah, I agree. That's one of the awesome benefits of social media is that when folks decide to do projects like that, we can all support them either monetarily or with just getting the word out. I always think that's cool. And we've had several of them recently in herpetoculture. And so hopefully that's a trend that continues for folks that have the information to share it with all of you. So I hope that happens. I really will make those text groups. So some of my friends are about to get some messages to help Eric get on the book track. So that should be awesome. Like I just mentioned when we were talking about sponsors and things like that, Black Box Cages. I did some lives earlier this week. My signal was terrible, as evidenced by the late start tonight with the laptop. I know some of it was a little blurry. I apologize for that. Teresa is my video person, and so she is going to help me set up some videos that instead of being live, we will just publish them later on to show you guys what I was talking about as far as setting up things with zoopoxy and showing the difference between the rocks and the trees and the things like that. But the black box cages are mocked up already with the lighting and the heating, so I'm very excited for that. Those cages are super cool. I can't wait to see them finished and get them some pictures and stuff to show some of the options they could have for the enclosures that they're making. So I'm really glad I was able to get those. Yeah, we, like Eric said, with keeping things going, I have guests lined up, oh man, all the way through the end of July, which is exciting. I have a few folks that are in Eric's boat that are coming on for a second round to talk to us about some of the more specific parts of their collection maybe we missed out on before. If they have some niche species and different things, I have some of you guys that have messaged and asked me questions about some of my guests and the new things they're doing. I have some of those folks coming on. And then there's a whole scattering of folks who have come to me throughout this process that will be new guests. Everything from monitor lizards to rainbow whiptails. I have a whole assortment of folks. So I'm really excited to continue with that. And we will see you guys again in 2 weeks. Later.